The South Sudan peace deal. Could an agreement between the government and rebels finally put a stop to the violence? Malawi officials are asking its citizens to remain calm while the government tries to secure more food. And just in time for back to school, teens turn to social media for fashion tips. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent Makori. This is Africa 54. We begin in East Africa, where South Sudanese President Salva Kiir signed a peace deal on Wednesday to end a brutal 20-month conflict with the opposition. However, he told regional African leaders at the ceremony that he had serious reservations about the agreement. Mr. Kiir, who has led South Sudan since it seceded from Sudan in 2011, had asked for more time for consultations last week, drawing threats of UN sanctions if he failed to ink the deal within a two-week deadline. His longtime rival and opposition leader, Riek Machar, who is expected to become the first vice president under the pact, signed the document last week in Addis Ababa. Now, there are many horror stories coming out of the violent 20-month conflict, including allegations of atrocities committed by South Sudanese soldiers. A written report that was submitted to UN Security Council members by United Nations experts accuses government forces of raping children, burning people alive in their homes, and hunting down others for days in swamps. On Tuesday, the Council heard a briefing by UN Aid Chief Stephen O'Brien, who told of reports of similar atrocities, some allegedly committed by government troops.
I am very concerned about the atrocities which continue to be reported. The scope and level of cruelty that has characterized the attacks against civilians suggests a deep depth of antipathy that goes beyond political differences. Allegations include rampant killing, rape, abduction, looting, arson, and forced displacement, and even such horrific acts as burning of people inside their own homes.
Well, O'Brien says that the scope and level of the cruelty in the attacks against civilians suggested a depth of antipathy that went beyond political differences. You know, a 25-year-old Muslim from Ghana has become the first recruit from the West African nation to join the Islamic State terrorist group. The family of Nazir Norte Alema, a university student, says he had initially told his parents he was traveling from his home in Accra to Presti, a mining town in the west of the country. However, the family saw a WhatsApp message from Nazir on August the 16th saying he was at a training ground to join the Islamic State group in an unknown country. His family and friends say Alema spent much of his spare time online, and it's almost certain he was radicalized through his interactions on Facebook rather than teachings in mosques. His parents were in shock as they spoke about their son.
All don't know, because Nazir is not for me alone. Nazir is, everybody loves Nazir. If you see him, you love him. Nazir is not a sort of person that you want to talk to him and he'll brush you off. It's not like that. He always gets time for people to talk to him. So maybe this kind of people approach him. I don't know.
There has been no correspondence between him and us, right. And then suddenly, out of the blues, he sends a message that he's on his way to join the ISIS.
Right.
Yes. We believed. No, we thought it was even a joke.
Right.
Yes. But with time, we know it is true.
Well, thousands of foreigners from more than 80 nations have joined the ranks of Islamic State and other radical groups in Syria and Iraq. Now, officials in Malawi are predicting that many people could face acute food shortages later this year due to low yields of the main staple crop, maize. The government is asking its citizens to stay calm while it tries to secure more food. Lamek Masina reports from Blantyre.
This maize porridge in Sima is a staple for most Malawians. But the government says that in coming months, many will struggle to put the food on the table. Months of severe flooding are largely to blame for a shortfall in this year's maize crop. The government estimates that some 200,000 Malawians are at risk, but regional officials say as many as 400,000 people may actually be affected. Prince Magombo, a journalism student in Blantyre, says maize prices have already doubled on the private market.
Even in the supermarkets, the prices are too high, and we people are suffering. We are the ones who are suffering.
Officials say they will purchase 30,000 metric tons of maize from neighboring Zambia by September, but it's not yet known what price they will have to pay. The maize could be 2, even 3 times as expensive as maize grown domestically. Restaurant owners say they fear the waste.
Maize has become too expensive for us, and even the maize millers have also increased their prices. We are failing to realize profits from the business.
Malawi's government is hoping to avoid the crisis, but analysts say imports are not always the solution.
We had a drought situation here in '99 and the year 2000. 42,000 people died. Not because there was no maize, but because the price of maize was inflated by over 100% and they couldn't afford the maize.
Authorities have preached that no one will starve to death this time. Malawians hope that the government can live up to its promise. Lamek Masina for VOA News, Blantyre, Malawi.
Well, in West Africa, Ivory Coast farmers have begun transforming their plantations to accommodate rubber. It is a trend that has propelled the country to become the #1 rubber producer in Africa. Here's Africa 54's Mel Bailey.
Over the past decade, cocoa farmers in the Ivory Coast, the #1 producer of cocoa in the world, have become fed up with poor wages and biannual pay. Now they are taking action to detach themselves from the state-run cocoa industry by planting rubber trees in hopes of carving out a path to financial independence.
It's like you have a salary with rubber. You're practically paid each month. But with cocoa, it's different. Throughout the year, you can eat at least 3 times. But one needs to eat each day. You see the problem?
The lush village of Dobu, that once boasted palm and cocoa plantations interspersed between winding roads and forest, has now been taken over by tall white trees with black spouts.
This very plantation that you see here, it used to be a cocoa plantation, a thriving cocoa plantation. It was really large when we came here in 2003, 2004. It was a large cocoa plantation. It goes all the way down there. Today it's a good rubber plantation that gives a large quantity of rubber.
The transition into planting rubber is something that Issouf Camara calls dynamic for the country.
I think that the fact that we are beginning to transform into a rubber production state shows the dynamism of our agricultural competency in Côte d'Ivoire. Agriculture in Côte d'Ivoire is really dynamic. We are first in the world in cocoa production and the first on the continent of Africa for rubber. I think that that is already a great depart.
However, there is a major downside to planting rubber. Once rubber trees are planted in the ground, the tons of CO2 or carbon dioxide they absorb from the atmosphere seeps down into the soil, inundating it with so much CO2 that nothing else can grow in its place for over 20 years. But Issouf Camara says that despite this, he still feels rubber is a future for the Ivory Coast.
I think that sincerely, rubber cultivation has given more to those who didn't have enough. Because, madame, you see, annual agriculture, which permits one to benefit each year, no longer responds to the needs of Africans. So we looked for a balance and something that would allow us to have something for each month.
Camara says that he and others from his association are looking for outside partners and investors to help build transformation factories so farmers can have a hand in transforming the rubber they cultivate. He knows it will not be easy, but he is optimistic that the Ivory Coast will soon be in the running for the top spot in world rubber production. Mel Bailey for VOA, Dobu, Ivory Coast.
We want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we covered. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54 and check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Find me on Twitter at VOA Vincent Makori. Coming up, how household trash can become clean cooking fuel. Stay with us.
health news and notes. This is Living Better.
A new study suggests that getting regular exercise early in life may be important for adult health. Researchers at Vanderbilt University, using data from the Shanghai Women's Health Study, say they found that women who had exercised for more than 80 minutes per week as adolescents or participated in team sports had a lower risk of cancer and heart disease. The researchers say they believe the findings likely apply to boys as well. Meanwhile, in a new study by the American Cancer Society, researchers say they find that adult women who spend 6 hours or more sitting every day have a greater risk of multiple myeloma, ovarian, and breast cancer than women who sit for 3 hours or less. The data is drawn from a study of 77,000 women followed for 15 years. I'm Martin Seacrest for VOA's Living Better.
Well, Chinese stocks tumbled further Wednesday, and other Asian shares fluctuated wildly despite Beijing's latest moves to stimulate growth in the world's second-largest economy. China's central bank late Tuesday cut interest rates 0.25% and told banks they could hold less money in reserve. Now the moves make it easier for consumers to buy products and companies to build factories and hire people. Markets initially reacted positively to the moves, with shares higher Tuesday in Europe and briefly in the United States. But Wednesday saw another frenzied day of trading in Asia, with markets swinging between big gains and losses. China's benchmark Shanghai Composite Index ended the day down 1.3%. Now, the two-day African Growth and Opportunity Act Forum is underway in Gabon. Representatives from 39 African countries are holding talks with U.S. officials in Libreville. AGOA, the fresh U.S. trade pact renewed by Congress for a decade in June, could provide relief to African economies buffeted by the commodities slump. But a failure to reform during the boom years has left many countries unable to profit from tariff-free access to the world's largest market. Under the deal, first signed in 2000, African exports to the United States rose to $26.8 billion by 2013, but more than 4/5 of that was oil. Now, the World Bank forecast GDP growth in sub-Saharan Africa will slow this year to 4.2%, down from an average of 6.4% during 2002 to 2008. Well, U.S. President Barack Obama's Mandela Washington Fellowship initiative brought 500 of Africa's brightest minds to America this year to learn new skills and new experiences. Among them was Rwandan-born Jean Bosco Nzeyimana. His idea to compost household trash into cleaner cooking fuel for poor families has won him several international innovation awards. VOA's Paul Diho has more.
21-year-old Jean Bosco Nzeyimana is the founder and CEO of Habona Limited, a Rwandan startup trying to address the lack of electricity in his rural village of Kitabi. He is part of a new breed of young African innovators trying to change Rwanda's image.
I have a company back home called the Habona Limited. It does a lot of work regarding waste management, whereby we collect waste, and after collecting the waste, we use them to produce affordable and environmentally friendly products in the form of biomass briquettes.
Jean Bosco's fascination with biogas started when he was a young boy, and his vision to create a biogas plant that can transform organic waste into flammable gas that can be distributed to the local population for their energy needs. He is partnering with the government to collect household trash, which he then sells as cleaner, cheaper source of cooking fuel for poor families in Rwanda.
I grew up just thinking about what I can do for my family, so I came up with the idea of taking advantage of waste and use them to produce these kind of fuels, which are actually better for the lives of people.
In his village, he's just a regular guy. In fact, very few people know about his innovation that is generating a buzz on the international scene. Jean Bosco was crowned last year as the winner of the Africa Innovation Prize, and also recognized in 2014 as a top young entrepreneur in Rwanda.
Being recognized as the top young entrepreneur of Rwanda was very, very good for me because, it showed me that I'm doing meaningful things. It showed me that, what I do is really impactful to the community, and it gave me some sense of, motivation.
For a rising biogas farm like Habona Limited, partnering with the right people in the business can definitely go a long way, as he plans to construct a biogas plant in his native country. While here in the United States, Jean Bosco attended Northwestern University for 6 weeks as part of the yearly fellowship. Dr. Mavi Norman served as a peer collaborator for Jean Bosco.
Bosco is an amazing, amazing young gentleman. Since I met him about 6 weeks ago, he's just shown to be a very serious, very focused, very diligent, very charismatic young man, and I'm certain that he is going to make some serious strides in Rwanda, but even beyond, throughout Africa.
Despite his early success, the young entrepreneur is focused on perfecting his innovation. He attributes his accomplishment to hard work.
Yeah.
What does success mean to you?
When people look at me, they say this young man is successful, and they say, he has won a lot of prizes, he has done this, but that doesn't mean success to me. For me, success is what I do to promote my society. Success means what I'm doing, how I'm working hard at my company.
The full implementation of this project will enable his company, Habona, to distribute biogas and biofertilizer to more than 500,000 households. For a young man whose dreams are big, the sky is the limit. Paul Ndiho, VOA News.
Welcome back. We're going back to a first story today, the signing of South Sudanese peace deal today by President Salva Kiir of South Sudan. Now, for some reaction on the completion of that peace deal, South Sudan opposition leader Riek Machar joins me on the phone from Addis Ababa. Mr. Machar, how would you characterize today's agreement in the young history of South Sudan?
Well, from our side, we signed it on the 17th of August. That is 9 days ago. We are happy that President Kiir has signed it today, and I think the people of South Sudan deserve peace. They have suffered for the last 20 months when fighting was raging. So it is a very important step that he has taken, and our reaction is that this is important. Now the next phase is to go for implementation.
Now, knowing that there were some issues that initially even led the president to be hesitant, what are some of your concerns regarding the implementation phase?
Well, up to now, I cannot say we have concerns on the implementation phase. We now have overcome the hurdle of signing and non-signing, and we should kick off the implementation by respecting the cessation of hostilities agreement, the ceasefire agreement, and the structures to implement the ceasefire should be put in place.
Now, so much has happened until this point. Do you get the feeling that this agreement, the content of this agreement, kind of place a foundation for a much better future for South Sudan?
Definitely. We recognize most of the agreement, but it is an imposed agreement by the IGAD plus mediators. When we weigh our losses from the first day we saw it, we felt we could live with the agreement itself, and we signed it. Now, the concerns we have is that we know up to today when President Kiir was signing the agreement, his forces are on the offensive. He has barges on the Nile. These are gunboats that would attack any time our locations and our forces. That is a concern to us. But the content of the agreement, despite some of the limitations in the agreement, we believe we could live with it. We could improve on it during the implementation.
Yeah. Now, Mr. Machar, very quickly, everybody in South Sudan I speak to is very disappointed with you guys, the leaders. How can you make it up to them in the next few days?
Well, you are generalizing it, the leaders. I am a victim. I think the blame shouldn't fall on me. I didn't start the war. I didn't target any community. It was the other side, the president, who targeted us and targeted specific communities. So this equal blame doesn't work. It doesn't at all. And well, you can see when the peace agreement was tabled, I was the first to sign it, despite that we think it did not meet our minimum. Mm-hmm. But because we want peace for South Sudan, we want stability to be restored to the country.
All right. Mr. Machar, thank you very much for giving us your perspectives. South Sudan opposition leader Riek Machar speaking to us from Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. Well, it's time now for a short break. Still to come on Africa 54. Teens go high-tech to keep up with fashion trends. Now, we'll be right back.
If you've just joined us, I'm Mariama Diallo, and here is a quick recap of today's headlines. In South Sudan, President Salva Kiir is expected to sign a peace deal to end a 20-month-old conflict, but with reservations. In Sierra Leone, last known Ebola patient is released from hospital, raising hopes that the West African nation may finally have beaten the devastating epidemic. And in Angola and Zambia, the devaluation of China's yuan has had a negative impact on some African economies, promoting uncertainty for investors. Finally, in Ethiopia, designer and entrepreneur Abe Scholz creates leather brand for luxury markets overseas. That's all for today. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
Welcome back to Africa 54. Here is what's trending. An Israeli designer has created an entire fashion collection on a 3D, kind of a 3D printer, opening the door for other people worldwide to design their own kind of designs of the same kind. Ms. Danit Pileg says 3D printing gives the freedom to experiment with the technology, even though it is expensive. And so are our designs. One item in Pele's collections, the red Liberty jacket, it can go for more than $2,000. Well, thank you. Well, and now we want to thank you very much. Rather, let's now come back here to the United States. Quite a number of young kids who grew up in the United States now are kind of taking a lot of interest in where they came from. They can be seen donning African dresses on the streets. They're listening to African artists. But it hasn't always been easy. Now, we have this from Damisi Afolo. Let's hear what they have to say.
In the past, images of Africa seen in America by elementary and middle school children were mostly negative. This was largely due to demeaning and stereotypical portrayals of Africans that were often found on television and other media outlets. Although some children of African immigrants knew those images did not constitute the complete reality of the continent, others assumed the images represented the reality on the ground.
I know in my personal experience, I just wasn't around other young first-generation Africans like me. So I felt kind of lost, you know. I felt like I was living in two worlds in a way. My mom did a really good job educating us about where we come from, about our ancestry. But when I would go and talk to my friends about it, I could tell they weren't really interested.
Africa's youth love their culture and are proud of their heritage and continent. Esther Githiu-Ewert, who immigrated to the United States from Africa, speaks with nostalgia about her carefree childhood filled with family, laughter, and unique traditions.
It was fun. I really loved growing up in Africa. I actually still miss being in Africa. We didn't have restrictions. We didn't have to watch who is the next door neighbor. We knew each other. We'd go out there and play, make our own balls. We didn't have dolls, so we had to create, maybe pick up old socks, wrap them up with nylon paper, kick the ball. We created our own little dolls.
Not only are young Africans living in the United States increasingly embracing their culture, but African Americans are also seeking out their African ancestry. Twins Cammie and Kylie Simmons explain their reasoning behind taking a DNA test.
People will always be like, what are you? So I did want to look up my roots. I just felt left out, being African American, not knowing where you came from and your heritage, and I just wanted to find my roots and actually know who I was.
After taking the test, the twins were happy to find that their roots are in Nigeria.
I'm really happy. I actually made a status on Facebook, and my Nigerian friends were like, woohoo, like, you're Nigerian. So I felt a closer connection to a lot of my friends who were of African descent, and I felt really happy and proud. And now I want to, actually tell them, I'm Nigerian too, let me learn about it, and let me, see what I can do to better my understanding about it. Since I am Nigerian, that's what it said on the test.
As more Africans immigrate to the United States, they can better present the true splendor of Africa's culture and traditions. Damisi Fawale for VOA News, Washington.
Well, and that's our show for today. Thanks a lot for staying with us. And just remember, you can catch up with us online on voaafrica.com. And join us again tomorrow for another edition of Africa 54.
Music is something that brings people together.
Music educates, it motivates, it's a bridge.
Music. Ali.
On
VOA.
I am Sheikh Sali, host and senior editor of VOA's international call-in talk show, Straight Talk Africa. The issues that we discuss are pertinent to most people on the African continent.
Real talk, real issues, the real Africa. It's time to get the scoop, Monday through Friday on VOA. Find your time zone and get the scoop.